Hello everyone. Before we jump in, make sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's get started. I've told this story more times than I can count, but I don't think I've ever laid it out in full detail. Maybe because when I tell it aloud, it just comes out as a quick memory, a strange event that unsettled me more than anything else I ever saw behind the wheel. But when I think back on it, really let my mind sit with every moment of that night, I realize how heavy it still feels. I've driven lorries for most of my life, spent thousands of hours on motorways between Edinburgh and London, seen more strange things than I can put into words, accidents, people acting reckless, even the odd bit of crime playing out in real time. But nothing has ever stuck in my head like this. It was a long-haul run from Edinburgh down toward London. I'd left in the early evening, the air cold enough to make the windows fog until the cab warmed. I was hauling down the M74 before connecting onto the M6, and from there it would be the long, straight push south. I had my usual setup in the cab, flask of coffee beside me, radio low, high-vis jacket hung behind the seat. It was dark by the time I'd gotten properly onto the motorway, just the constant hum of tires against the road and the endless white lines sliding beneath me. Any long-distance driver knows the rhythm. You settle into it, your eyes scanning mirrors, watching for taillights ahead, making sure your speed stays steady. It's almost hypnotic sometimes, the same stretch of tarmac going on for hours. I don't even remember what time it was when I first saw her. Maybe around 9 or 10 at night. The motorway wasn't empty, but traffic was light enough that you'd go several minutes without another vehicle close by. I remember checking my right mirror and noticing a car pacing me in the middle lane. That's not unusual. Plenty of drivers sit in blind spots longer than they should, but what made me actually turn my head was the movement. Something about the passenger caught my eye, and when I looked, I saw her. She had her hair pulled back in the tightest bun I think I'd ever seen, the kind you'd describe as a schoolteacher's bun, neat and strict, almost severe. My mind compared it straight away to that character from Matilda, Miss Trunchbull. The resemblance stuck instantly. Her face was pale, almost drained, and she was staring right at me. Not just a glance, not just idly looking around the way passengers sometimes do when bored. Her eyes were locked on me, wide, fixed, and there was something in them that I'll never forget. It wasn't anger, it wasn't recognition, it was fear. She looked terrified, like she'd just seen something unspeakable, and I couldn't understand why it was aimed at me. I held her gaze for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and in that time my stomach tightened in a way I can't explain. A coldness ran through me. Then the car drifted slightly ahead, switched lanes, and took the next exit without hesitation. I was left alone in the cab with that image of her face seared into my head. I remember shaking my head, muttering under my breath. Maybe she was having some sort of domestic row with the driver. Maybe she was just upset, lost in her own head, and I happened to look at the wrong moment. I tried to brush it off, but it rattled me. I carried on driving. The miles kept ticking down, and the incident lingered like a shadow, sitting in the back of my thoughts. The motorway stretched ahead, dark countryside rolling out on either side, nothing but the occasional glow of a service station or a junction. I'd taken a sip of coffee, adjusted the radio, tried to sink back into the routine. About half an hour later, though, I caught sight of something in my mirror again. Another car coming up alongside me, easing into the right-hand lane. I glanced over, more out of habit than anything, and my heart gave a lurch, because there she was again. Different car this time, different color, different make, different driver at the wheel. But in the passenger seat, pressed back against it with the same posture, was that same woman with the same severe bun and the same expression of raw fear locked onto me. Her eyes hadn't softened, hadn't changed. If anything, they looked even wider. I felt my hands tighten on the wheel. My first thought was that I had to be mistaken. It couldn't be the same woman. What were the odds? But it was. The same hair, the same pale face, the same fixed look that seemed almost desperate. The car lingered just long enough for me to be certain, then moved on ahead, merging into the dark distance. I remember actually saying out loud to myself, "What the hell is going on here?" My chest felt tight. My first instinct was to get off at the next services and report it. Even if it was nothing, even if it was some bizarre coincidence, it was too strange to ignore. I told myself, next stop, I'll pull over. I'll get details if I can. Number plates, descriptions, something. But the car was gone too quick. No plates, no make, no solid detail stuck in my head except her face. By the time I rolled past the next services, I slowed slightly, considered pulling in, but then thought, what am I going to say? A woman looked scared at me from two different cars? They'd think I was overtired, or worse, losing it. I carried on. Still, I couldn't shake it. I kept glancing in mirrors, scanning headlights behind me, watching every car that passed like it was carrying some secret. Hours went by. The motorway south can feel endless at night, a river of tarmac that doesn't change no matter how far you drive. The coffee went lukewarm. My eyes burned slightly from staring at the beams of oncoming traffic. I'd started to think maybe I was letting my imagination twist it all up, making more of it than it was. Then, almost in London, 4 hours after that first sighting, it happened again. This time I noticed the car earlier. It crept up on my right, steady, deliberate. I already felt my pulse climbing, a horrible sense of déjà vu pressing down on me before I even looked. And when I did, my mouth went dry. The passenger window rolled alongside my cab. There she was. Same bun. Same face. But this time it wasn't just silent fear. She was screaming. Her mouth was wide open, her teeth bared, her whole body turned toward me as she shouted something I couldn't hear through the glass and the roar of the road. But the way her eyes locked with mine, the way her features twisted, I knew she was screaming at me. Not to me, not past me. Asterisk at me, asterisk. I felt my entire body jolt. I yanked the lorry slightly, heart pounding, and before I could even process, the car surged ahead and vanished into the night. That was the breaking point. I pulled into the very next levee I saw, threw on the hazards, and grabbed my phone. My hands shook as I dialed the police. My voice was unsteady as I explained what I'd seen. A woman appearing in multiple cars, looking terrified, screaming by the last sighting. I didn't even know how to phrase it without sounding unhinged. But the operator was calm, asked me to stay where I was until they could confirm details. After a few minutes, they came back and told me something that sent another chill down my spine. They said I wasn't the only one. In the last half hour, they'd had 3 other calls describing the same woman, same area, same kind of encounter. Other drivers had seen her too. That was the only thing that convinced me I wasn't losing my grip. They took my details, told me they'd pass it on, that officers were aware and looking into it. Then they told me I could continue my journey if I felt safe to do so. I sat there in that levee for a good 15 minutes before I started the engine again. The motorway seemed darker than before when I merged back onto it, every pair of headlights behind me setting my nerves on edge. But I didn't see her again. Not once. The rest of the trip into London was uneventful, just the usual press of night traffic as I neared the city. When I parked up finally and got out, the cold air hit me harder than usual. I looked around at the other lorries, the other drivers, the street lamps glowing yellow, and I felt strangely isolated, like I'd brushed against something I wasn't supposed to understand. I kept an eye on the news for days afterwards, checking papers, listening to radio reports, waiting to hear if anything had been discovered about her. But nothing. Not a single mention. The police never called me back. It just ended there, unresolved. And that's the part that's haunted me the most all these years. If it had been a crime, surely it would have made the news. If it had been some mistake, some bizarre prank, someone would have come forward. But nothing ever did. Just silence. So I'm left with those images burned into my mind. That bun pulled tight, that pale face locked on me in fear, and that final, soundless scream through glass. I still drive the same route. I still pass those stretches of motorway where I saw her, laybys where I pulled over, services where I almost stopped. And every time, I catch myself scanning the windows of passing cars, half expecting to see her again. She never shows. But I know what I saw, and I know I wasn't the only one. Whatever it was, whoever she was, it's never left me. And I don't think it ever will. When I first took this job as an over-the-road trucker, I thought it would be exciting. I thought it would be all about freedom, traveling across the country, seeing different states, different towns, different landscapes, watching the sun rise in one place and set in another. I thought I'd be building a pile of stories I could bring back home to tell my family and my friends, things that would make them laugh, or shake their heads, or maybe even admire me for what I was doing. I was partly right. It is exciting, but it didn't take long for me to realize that a lot of the stories I've collected aren't the kind you sit around and share with people you care about. Not because I don't trust them, and not because they wouldn't listen, but because I know deep down they wouldn't believe me. Or worse, maybe they would believe me, and then I'd feel guilty for putting the thought in their heads. Anyway, I guess I should explain who I am before I get too far ahead of myself. My name is Brittany, I'm 22 years old, and I've been driving solo for a few months now. I went through my training with one of the bigger companies. It doesn't really matter which one. And once I got my own rig, I started running loads by myself. That's when things got different. When you've got someone else in the passenger seat, your mind doesn't play as many tricks on you. When you're alone, especially at night, especially in the middle of nowhere, your head can start filling in the silence with things you don't want to think about. I didn't realize just how far middle of nowhere could really feel until I found myself driving across Nevada on Highway 50. People call it the loneliest road in America. That's not a nickname someone came up with as a joke. It's a real thing. You can go miles and miles without seeing another car, without seeing a gas station, without seeing so much as a porch light in the distance. Just desert. Endless black stretches of nothing. I had about an hour left before I could stop at the next truck stop, and I was exhausted. I had the AC blasting in my face just to keep myself from nodding off, which is stupid and dangerous, I know, but sometimes it feels like the only thing you can do. I was focused on the road, fighting to stay awake, when something darted out right in front of me. It was so fast that at first, I thought maybe I had imagined it. But I hadn't. I caught just enough of a glimpse to see a shape, white, low to the ground, crossing from one side of the road to the other. By the time I could even think about reacting, it was gone, swallowed up by the brush on the side of the highway. I told myself it was just a dog, maybe even a coyote. Animals cross roads all the time at night. No big deal. But my brain wouldn't let it go. It wasn't just that it was white. It was bright white, like it almost reflected the headlights back at me. And it was fast. Too fast. I gripped the wheel tighter and tried to focus, shaking it off. But not even a minute later, my whole rig lurched hard to the left. I barely caught it in time, swerving back and slamming my foot gently on the brakes, praying I didn't overcorrect and jackknife the trailer. An 18-wheeler doesn't forgive mistakes. One wrong move, and you're a headline in tomorrow's paper. I managed to get it slowed down and kept it straight, my heart hammering. I thought maybe a tire had blown, but the truck felt steady under me once I got control back. I scanned the shoulder for a spot wide enough to pull off. Eventually, I found a little flat stretch of dirt and eased the truck over, hit the brakes, and climbed out with my flashlight. The desert air hit me immediately, dry, sharp, with that smell of dust and sagebrush. It was cold, colder than I expected for summer. But then again, that's what happens out here at night. The stars overhead were so clear it felt like I could reach out and touch them. The highway stretched out in both directions, empty and silent. I walked around the truck and almost dropped the flashlight when I saw it. On the side of my trailer, there was a dent. Not just a ding or a scratch. This was a massive dent, at least 5 feet across and several feet high, pressed in deep enough that I couldn't even imagine how much force it would take to make a mark like that. The edges weren't clean either. They bowed in unevenly, like something had slammed into the side of the trailer with brute strength instead of just grazing it. I shined the light across it, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was maybe a boulder had come down from somewhere, but the desert was flat in every direction. No cliffs, no slopes, no hills to roll a rock down. There was nothing around but dirt and brush. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. The crunch of dirt, slow and heavy, coming from behind me. I whipped around, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the dark, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain tried to tell me it was a dog, but the longer I stared, the less sense that made. It was big, taller than me, broad, standing maybe 50 feet away. The white of its body practically glowed in the dark, but not like fur. It was patchy, rough-looking. Its arms were long, too long, reaching almost to its knees, and its shoulders rose and fell with heavy breaths I could hear even from where I stood. The head was wrong. It looked too much like a wolf, stretched out with a long snout full of teeth that caught the light when it opened its mouth. Saliva dripped from it in long strands. The eyes, black, lifeless, locked right on me. I couldn't move. My body refused to listen. My heart hammered in my throat, and every instinct I had screamed to run, but my legs felt rooted in the dirt. The only thing between me and that thing was the empty space of the desert and my truck behind me. It took a step forward, slow, deliberate. The sound of its weight pressing into the dirt was louder than it should have been, or maybe that was just how tuned in my ears were in that moment. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, knowing damn well it was useless, and tried to think of something, anything. Then just as suddenly it stopped. It stared at me for what felt like forever, chest heaving, saliva glinting. Then it turned. Slowly. It dropped down on all fours and moved off into the brush, vanishing into the dark without a sound. I stood there for minutes, long enough for my body to finally catch up and remind me I could breathe again. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the light. I sprinted around the front of the truck, yanked open the door, and hauled myself inside, locking it behind me. My hands fumbled on the ignition, but once the engine roared to life, I didn't waste a second. I eased the truck back onto the highway and pushed it as hard as it would go. You can't exactly floor an 18-wheeler the way you can a car, but I drove like every mile between me and the next truck stop was the difference between life and death. For a while it felt like it was. The whole time my eyes flicked back to the mirrors, scanning the dark edges of the desert, waiting to see those black eyes glowing in the reflection. Waiting for the sound of footsteps keeping pace with me on the gravel. But nothing came. The desert stayed quiet. Empty. By the time I finally pulled into the truck stop, I was running on fumes, both the truck and me. I parked, shut it down, and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, my hands still trembling. I couldn't bring myself to get out and do a walk around. I didn't want to see that den again, didn't want to be outside in the open air where anything could step out from the dark. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the trailer, every hiss of the air brakes, every sound of another truck pulling in set my nerves on fire. I sat in the bunk with the curtains drawn, clutching a flashlight like it would do me any good, and waited for the sun to come up. When morning finally came, I forced myself to step out and look. The dent was still there, massive and ugly, proof that it hadn't been a nightmare. A couple of other drivers walked past and gave me looks. One even whistled low and asked what the hell I hit. I just shrugged and said I didn't know. That was easier than the truth. And that's the thing, I don't know what I saw. I don't know what slammed into my trailer, or why it didn't tear me apart when it had the chance. All I know is that it was real, and that highway hasn't felt the same since. I still drive. I still take loads across the country, even across Nevada, but I keep my stops planned tight now. I don't linger out in the desert after dark. I don't pull over unless I absolutely have to. Because out there, on that stretch of highway where the night swallows everything, I learned that we're not alone. And some things you're better off not seeing twice. That's why I don't tell these stories to my family or my friends. I don't want them thinking about what's waiting out there on those empty roads, watching, waiting for another tired driver to stop and step out into the dark. I've seen enough. That's all the proof I'll ever need. I was never a truck driver, never one of those people who spend half their lives on the road, but I have always had a love for long drives. There's something about the silence, the steady hum of the tires, and the way the road disappears into darkness that settles me. Sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes lonely, sometimes both at once. That night, driving through the Canadian Rockies, it was something else entirely. It had been late, close to midnight. I had just passed through a small town, one of those places that feels more like a cluster of houses around a gas station than an actual community. The kind of town where you blink and it's already behind you. The road beyond it stretched into the dark mountains, no streetlights, no signs of people, nothing but the black shape of trees pressed against the night sky. The further I got from that town, the more it felt like I was driving into nothingness. My headlights cut across the road and caught pieces of rock and brush, but outside that beam there was only endless dark. I had needed to stop. I'd been holding it for a while, waiting for the next rest stop, but I must have missed it. The last sign I remembered seeing had said something like, "Next service is 45 kilometers," and I realized I had blown past the only chance for a proper bathroom for a while. It didn't matter though. The highway was completely deserted. I hadn't seen another set of headlights in what felt like forever, and my phone had been bouncing between 1 and 2 bars of service. Out here, you're just on your own. So I did what I thought was harmless. I slowed down, eased my car to the gravel shoulder, and killed the engine. When I stepped out, the silence hit me harder than I expected. It was the kind of silence that isn't really silent. You can hear faint things if you listen long enough. The crunch of gravel under your shoes. The whisper of wind somewhere high in the trees. The deep hum of the mountains just existing around you. But compared to the noise of the car and the road behind me, it felt like the whole world had gone dead still. I walked a little away from the car, unzipped, and stood there in the dark. My headlights had clicked off when I killed the engine, so it was just me, the faint light of the dashboard glow, and the night swallowing everything else. The stars overhead were incredible, thousands of them like a frozen spill across the sky. The mountains loomed as darker shapes against that lighter patch of stars. I couldn't even see where the road bent ahead, just shadows. Afterward, I pulled out a cigarette. I don't smoke much, only when I'm stressed or when I feel like the quiet is too much. That night, it felt right. I lit it, leaned against the driver's side door, and watched the tip burn orange in the dark. The taste and the smell grounded me a little. I could almost pretend it was just another night. That was when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me. When you're standing in almost total dark, your brain starts to invent shapes. I saw movement at the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards away. At first, I told myself it had to be a deer. A shadow sliding between the darker trees, the kind of thing you catch in your peripheral vision. I squinted, dragged on my cigarette, and waited to see it again. Then it stepped forward. It wasn't a deer. It was a man. There he was, walking straight out of the woods, slow and steady like he had been waiting for something. His shape was clear enough, broad shoulders, arms hanging loose at his sides, a dark silhouette against the dim sky. There was no mistaking it. I froze. I don't know how long I just stood there, cigarette burning in my fingers, trying to process what I was seeing. This was the middle of nowhere, miles from any town. No houses nearby. No campsites that I knew of. Just endless forest and rock. There was no reason for a person to be walking out of the woods here at this hour. And yet, there he was. My instincts kicked in. I didn't want to make it obvious I was nervous, but every hair on my body was on edge. I flicked the cigarette to the ground, turned, and walked calmly but quickly back to the driver's side door. I got in, shut it, locked it immediately. My hands were shaking a little as I started the car and put it in drive. I didn't pull out though. For some reason I just sat there, headlights off, watching him. The man didn't stop. He kept walking, slow and steady, until he was right at the edge of the shoulder. Then, without hesitating, he walked up to the passenger side of my car and stopped by the door. My heart was pounding. He was just standing there, close enough now that I could see details when the dash lights caught him. His face was pale, drawn. His clothes looked dirty, worn, like he'd been out there for a long time. He raised a hand and knocked on the passenger window. For a long moment I didn't move. I thought about just slamming the gas and peeling out, leaving him there. Every part of me screamed that it wasn't safe to roll down that window, that nothing good could come from it. But there was something in the way he knocked, firm but not aggressive, almost desperate. Against my better judgment, I reached over and cracked the window just an inch. His voice was low, flat, but dead serious. He said he needed me to call the cops. That froze me in place even more. Out here, a stranger comes out of the woods at midnight asking for the cops. Your brain races through possibilities. Was he dangerous? Was this some kind of setup? Was there someone else waiting in the trees? My hand hovered over the gear shift, ready to floor it. But something in his tone made me pause. He wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to scare me. He sounded broken. I asked him why. His reply came slowly, heavy like the words weighed him down. He said he had gone out into the woods to kill himself. He had a knife, and that had been his plan. But when the moment came, he thought about his daughters and couldn't do it. He had walked out to the road instead, hoping someone would be there. I remember my stomach dropping. I looked at his face properly then. He wasn't lying. His eyes were wet, his jaw trembling. He looked exhausted, like every bit of strength he had was gone. And in his hand, sure enough, he was holding a kitchen knife. Not waving it, not threatening, just holding it loosely like he didn't know what else to do with it. I nodded, reached for my phone, and prayed the one bar of service would hold. I dialed 911, gave them my location as best as I could using mile markers I remembered passing. My voice shook as I told them there was a man here who needed help, who said he had tried to end his life. They assured me they'd send someone, but out here it would take time. While we waited, he just stood there, quiet. Sometimes his shoulders shook as he cried softly. I kept my window barely cracked and stayed in my seat, car still in drive, but I talked to him through the gap. I told him maybe set the knife down on the ground until the cops arrived. He listened. Slowly, he bent and laid it in the gravel, then stepped back. The minutes dragged. It felt like forever. The highway stayed completely empty. No cars, no trucks, nothing. Just me in my idling car, and him standing in the beam of my dim interior lights. I smoked another cigarette, nerves rattling, but kept the window cracked to check on him. He didn't try to come closer. He just kept wiping his face with his sleeve, staring at the ground. Finally, the glow of headlights appeared far down the road. Red and blue followed. Relief washed over me so strong I almost felt sick. 2 cruisers pulled up, and officers got out cautiously. They talked to him, guided him away from my car, cuffed him gently, picked up the knife. Before they left, I got out and walked a little closer. I don't know why. Maybe because I couldn't just let it end without saying something. I told him I hoped he'd be okay, that his daughters needed him, that things could turn around. He didn't say much back, just nodded, eyes down, still crying. Then the cops guided him into the car, and they drove off into the night. I stood there a while longer, the cigarette in my hand burning down to the filter. The silence rushed back, and once their cars disappeared around the bend, and suddenly I was alone again, miles from anywhere, the dark pressing close. But it wasn't the same as before. I kept thinking about him, about how close he had been to never walking out of those woods, about how, by some strange chance, I had pulled over at the exact moment he needed someone to. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt heavy, tired, grateful maybe, that he had chosen to step toward the road instead of deeper into the forest. When I finally got back in my car and pulled away, the stars overhead seemed sharper, brighter. The road stretched out endless in front of me, but I kept seeing his face reflected in the window. I don't know what became of him after that night. I can only hope he found the strength to keep going, for his daughters, for himself. I hope he's still out there somewhere alive. I think about him often, and every time I pass a dark stretch of road like that, I remember the way he walked out of the tree line, silent, desperate, but still alive. I used to drive hotshot freight across the plains and upper Midwest, usually Minnesota, the Dakotas, and into Montana. It was the kind of job that suited me, long hours on the road, just me and the truck, running hard to get parts and machinery where they needed to be. Farmers depended on it. A lot of times it wasn't glamorous, just another axle or a gearbox or some heavy steel piece that broke at the worst possible time. But when you're hauling something that a farm needs to keep running the next morning, it feels important. Those people are counting on you, and you know that if you fail, it's not just money, it's time and work they can't get back. That weight sits in your gut while you're cruising down those endless highways. This one run took me across North Dakota. If you've never been across that state in the dead of night, it's hard to describe. People say flat, and you think you know what flat is. You don't. Not until you've driven straight through it. The land stretches out in every direction, as far as your eyes can see, even when headlights only cut a cone through the blackness. During the day, it feels like you're driving on the surface of some other planet. Just land and sky, no brakes, no real features, just a horizon line that never gets closer. At night, it's worse. Out there in the middle of nowhere, the stars almost hurt your eyes, they're so sharp. The road hums beneath you, blacktop laid in ruler straight lines, and after a while it feels like you're not even moving. It was about 2 in the morning when it happened. I'd been running since late afternoon, trying to get a tractor part across the state and into Montana by morning. The farm was desperate for it. They'd called in a panic earlier that day when the part failed. I had it strapped in tight behind me, wrapped and secured. I remember checking the load twice before I even left, just out of habit. That piece of machinery wasn't going anywhere. I had a thermos of coffee riding shotgun, and the radio dialed low, just enough to keep me company, but not so loud it made me edgy. The hum of the engine, the faint static of a station too far away to come in clear, and the dull ache of hours behind the wheel had all combined into that strange half-dream state truckers know too well. Highway hypnosis. I wasn't asleep, but my brain wasn't sharp either. The white lines kept zipping under the truck, the reflectors caught and released my headlights, and the minutes folded in on themselves. That's when I saw it. At first it was just a shape on the road ahead, half a mile out maybe. I squinted, leaned a little closer to the windshield, letting my eyes adjust. The road was dead straight, flat as a tabletop. Whatever it was stretched all the way across my lane. My first thought was retread. Happens all the time. Chunks of rubber blown off a semi-tire, sitting there waiting to wreck your suspension if you hit it. I eased off the accelerator and nudged the wheel, preparing to drift into the opposite lane. Traffic was non-existent. At that hour, in that stretch of nowhere, you could drive for an hour and not see another pair of headlights. I figured I'd go around, pass it, and be back up to speed within seconds. But as the truck rolled closer, the beams of my headlights filled in more detail. It wasn't rubber. It wasn't debris at all. My gut went tight, and suddenly I was wide awake. 2 people. They were lying head to toe, stretched across the full width of my lane. Perfectly placed, like they'd measured it. One's head was against the white line, the other's against the center stripe, their bodies making one long, unbroken obstacle across the asphalt. I gripped the wheel, muscles locked up, trying to make sense of it. People don't lie down in the middle of the road. Not like that. Not out here in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m. My headlights swept fully over them, and they didn't move. No flinch, no hand up to shield their eyes. Just stillness. I jerked the wheel into the opposite lane at the last second, heart hammering, the trailer following with a low groan of tires. The truck rumbled past, and I stomped on the brakes, slowing hard until I was nearly stopped. In my rear view, the shapes were still there, bathed in the red wash of taillights. Still not moving. Every part of me screamed to back up, get out, see if they needed help. I even reached for the gear shift. But then another thought hit me, sharp as glass. I remembered a story an old hand had told me years back. A graybeard who'd been hauling freight longer than I'd been alive. We'd been parked side by side at some rest area, killing time with coffee, when he leaned in close and told me about the kinds of things people did out on these empty stretches. He said there were places, remote places, where folks would lie in the road just like that, waiting. You'd think you were doing the right thing by stopping, maybe even saving a life. But the second you got out of your cab, they'd come at you. Not just the ones lying there. Others, hidden in the weeds, waiting. They'd beat you down, take your truck, your load, maybe even leave you broken out in the dirt. I had laughed at the time, thinking it sounded more like a horror story than reality. He hadn't laughed. He'd just nodded, like he'd seen it. That memory froze me. My hand dropped away from the shifter. My eyes stayed locked on the mirror. Then it happened. The two figures moved. They both sat up at the same time, then pushed to their feet like it was choreographed. No stumble, no slow rise like someone who'd been hurt or drunk or out of it. Just a smooth push to standing. And then, as my truck idled, they walked. Not toward the center of the lane, not toward each other. They walked side by side toward the shoulder, toward the black emptiness off the road. That was all I needed. I shoved the truck back into gear and rolled forward, my chest tight, the sound of the engine suddenly too loud in the cab. I didn't look back again. The road stretched out ahead of me, black and endless. My hands stayed locked on the wheel, every muscle stiff. My eyes kept darting to the edges of the highway, half expecting someone else to dart out from the ditch. I drove another 10 miles before I even realized I was holding my breath in short bursts. When I finally reached a stretch with enough reception, I picked up my phone and called it in. I told the dispatcher what I'd seen, gave them the mile marker, the time, everything I could remember. They said they'd send someone to check, but I knew the truth. Out there, in the middle of nowhere, by the time anyone got there, those people would be long gone. I kept going. Every mile past that spot felt like it was pulling me further away from something bad that could have happened. I thought about how close I'd been to stopping, how easy it would have been to throw it in reverse, step out, and walk back, and how that might have been the last thing I ever did. By the time dawn started bleeding into the sky behind me, painting the horizon in pale orange and gray, I'd made it across the border into Montana. I dropped the part off, signed the papers, shook the farmer's hand. He was grateful, and I tried to smile like it was just another job. But inside, I was still running that stretch of blacktop over and over in my head. Flat land. 2 bodies. The way they stood up when I didn't do what they expected. That old graybeard saved me, whether he knew it or not. His story stuck in my head long enough to remind me at the exact second I needed it. Because if I had backed up, if I had walked back to check, I don't think I'd be here to tell this story. That night left me with a different kind of highway hypnosis. Not the kind that makes your eyes heavy, but the kind that makes you see things in the dark, in the ditches, on the edge of the beam of your headlights. Every trip after that, I carried his story like a shield. It was the only reason I kept my truck, my load, my job, and my teeth. And every time I rolled through that stretch of North Dakota again, I couldn't help but glance at the shoulder, half expecting to see someone waiting. I've been a trucker for a good chunk of my life now, and in all those years on the road, I've seen plenty of strange things. You drive enough lonely miles at night, and the highway has a way of throwing shadows at you, playing tricks on your mind. I've seen distant lights that looked like cars but never came closer, figures at rest stops that disappeared when I blinked, and stretches of road where I was the only soul for hours. Most of it, I chalk up to exhaustion, to my mind wandering when the hum of the tires and the empty dark stretches start to blur together. But there was one night years back when something happened that stuck with me harder than just about anything else. I was hauling out of Tucson, Arizona, heading north into Salt Lake City. Normally it's a pretty straightforward route, but that year the main highway had been wrecked in a flash flood. A whole section of the road was taken out, and they were still doing construction, so anyone heading north had to take this strange detour. It wound up through the mountains in lower Utah, a real out-of-the-way stretch of road. Not much out there but scrub, rocks, and endless stretches of land where it felt like nobody had set foot in 100 years. By the time I got deep into that detour it was late, the sky already black. I'd been driving since morning, and the hum of the road was getting to me. The kind of tired where your eyelids feel heavy no matter how much coffee you dump into yourself. I told myself I'd push on a little further, maybe make it to the next small town, but after another half hour of dark mountain road with no lights, no signs of life, I decided I'd had enough. The safest thing to do was pull over and get some rest in the bunk. There weren't any rest stops, no wide gas stations with bright buzzing lights out there. Just me and the mountains and the kind of silence that sinks into your skin. I found a stretch of shoulder wide enough for me to pull over without blocking the road and ease the rig to a stop. I killed the lights and the engine, and just like that the world outside was gone. Pitch black. When you're in the middle of nowhere like that, with the closest town a good 40 miles away, there isn't even a glow on the horizon. Just darkness pressing against every window. I climbed into the bunk, stretched out, and let the silence of the night swallow me. Usually it takes me a while to fall asleep in the truck if I'm parked somewhere unfamiliar. The noises outside, the occasional car, or the wind rattling against the cab always keep me half awake. But out there, it was so still it felt almost unnatural. No cars, no wind, just nothing. I think that silence knocked me out quicker than I expected. I must have been out a few hours when something woke me. I remember the time clear as day because I looked at my phone. For in the morning, the dead hour of the night, when everything feels a little off. At first I thought maybe it was just a dream or the usual creaks of the rig cooling off in the night air, but then I realized I could hear something. A sound I knew didn't belong. It was faint at first, but steady, something brushing against the truck. Not the wind, not a branch or gravel hitting the sides. It was too deliberate. It was coming from right outside my cab, just inches from my head where I was lying in the bunk. The sound of someone, or something, messing with the air and power cables between the cab and the trailer. I froze, listening hard, my body instantly wide awake. I could hear the plastic and metal shifting, a slight tug here and there, like fingers playing with them. I told myself it could be an animal. Out in that part of the country, you've got mountain lions, bears, all kinds of things that might wander close. Maybe something smelled food, or was just curious. But then the truck shifted under me. Not just a little creak, but a full shake, the kind of movement you only get when something heavy climbs onto it. I felt it through the bunk, the whole cab rocking slightly, as whatever it was settled onto the back landing. My mind went straight to weight. Whatever had just climbed up had to be at least 200 or 300 pounds. That ruled out a stray raccoon or coyote. A bear maybe. A mountain lion. Both possibilities ran through my head, neither of them good. I lay there, frozen, the sound of my own heartbeat louder than anything else. Finally, I decided I had to do something. I wasn't about to climb out and meet a bear face to face, but I figured maybe I could scare it off. So I balled up my fist and slammed it hard into the cab wall beside me. The sound echoed loud in the night, metal ringing under the impact. The reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of the startled growl or hiss of an animal, I heard a scream. A man's scream. A full-throated, panicked yell that made every hair on my body stand straight up. The sound of someone falling followed immediately after, a body hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Before I could process that, the night around me erupted. Voices, dozens of them, shouting and moving. I heard boots hitting the dirt, people yelling to each other, the scrape of gear and metal. The sound came from every direction, circling around my truck. I scrambled up front, heart hammering, and turned the key. The lights blazed on, cutting through the black, and what I saw had me gripping the wheel tight. A whole squad of men surrounded me. Army fatigues, rifles, full packs, the works. At least 15 of them stood in the beam of my headlights, blinking against the sudden brightness. Their faces showed the same shock I felt. For a long second, no one moved. Then it clicked for me. Army reserves. Midnight training exercises. I'd parked right in the middle of their capture drills. Later I found out the details. They had been ordered to secure an abandoned truck as part of the training. Problem was, that truck was 3 miles back down the road. They'd stumbled across me instead, and from the way I was parked in the dark with no lights, they assumed I was part of the exercise. I was supposed to be a prop, but instead I was an actual trucker trying to get some sleep. Once the shock wore off, the tension broke. They realized their mistake, and I realized I hadn't just been targeted by something out of a nightmare. We all laughed, a shaky kind of laugh that comes after the adrenaline drains out of your system. But I can tell you this, those minutes between waking up to the sound of something on my truck and flipping on the lights were some of the longest of my life. They radioed back to their commanding officer to explain the situation, making sure the other squads wouldn't stumble across me thinking I was part of their drill. I pulled myself back together, still shaky from the scare, and crawled into the driver's seat to sip some water and calm down. After a while the soldiers moved on, disappearing back into the night like they'd never been there. The darkness swallowed them again, leaving me alone on the shoulder of that lonely Utah road. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. Every little noise set me on edge, and the silence outside felt heavier now that I knew I hadn't just been dreaming. I ended up starting the engine and driving until the sun came up, just to put the memory of that night behind me. Looking back, it makes for a hell of a story. Funny, even once you know the ending. But in the middle of it, waking up to something climbing on my truck in the dead of night, hearing a man scream right outside my window, there wasn't a damn thing funny about it. It felt like the kind of moment where the world tips sideways, where anything could happen. I've had a lot of long nights on the road since then, but that one will always stick out. Not because of ghosts or monsters, but because sometimes reality is plenty strange enough. One wrong turn, one coincidence, and you find yourself caught between a squad of soldiers and the dark silence of a Utah mountain road, realizing just how easy it is for the night to play tricks on you. And that night it did. I pulled into the Purdue plant late in the evening, just as the last light of day was fading. The place was quiet, or as quiet as a facility like that can ever be. The glow of the yard lights stretched across the asphalt, bouncing off trailers and trucks like muted spotlights. I dropped my empty trailer at the designated spot, the clang of the landing gear and hiss of the airlines sounding especially loud against the stillness of the night. After that, I eased the truck around to where they let bobtails sit, right beside a pond I hadn't noticed before. It looked peaceful at first glance, a small patch of water surrounded by tall grass, lit faintly by the orange glow of the yard lamps. There was a faint fog just beginning to creep across the water as the night cooled, giving it that eerie calm you only get when everything else around is steel and concrete. It was a strange sight next to an industrial lot, but I figured it was just for drainage or maybe runoff from the plant. My pickup window wasn't for another 12 hours, so I had time to burn. I went through my post-trip inspection, walking the length of the truck, running my hands along the tires, tapping at the sidewalls with my thumper, checking my lights, brakes, and fluids. The little routine gave me something to do, and when I was done, I climbed back up into the cab and shut the door behind me. The air inside was stale but comforting, like any trucker's home away from home. I stretched out in the bunk, boots tucked against the wall, the hum of the reefer units in the distance blending with the low buzz of the yard lamps outside. I scrolled my phone for a while until the battery dipped lower than I liked, then set it aside and closed my eyes. The first sound came around 3 in the morning. A sharp, deliberate tapping on the passenger side door. It wasn't the kind of sound you could mistake for the wind or a random pop from the truck settling. No, this was rhythmic. 2 or 3 taps, just loud enough to wake me. My eyes snapped open in the darkness of the cab. My first thought was that maybe another driver needed something, directions, a lumper check, maybe asking about a dock number. That wasn't unusual at places like this, especially when guys didn't want to wake dispatch or couldn't find security. I pushed myself up, rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, and slid into the driver's seat. The yard lights cast enough of a glow that I could see the ground outside without flipping on my own interior lamps. I peered through the passenger side window. Nothing. No figure standing there. No other trucker with a clipboard. Just the stillness of the lot and that dim orange haze bouncing off the pond's surface. I sat there for a while listening. The only sound was the faint whine of a reefer unit across the lot. My pulse slowed, and I leaned back. Maybe I'd imagined it. I'd been in that half-dream state where little noises get amplified into something bigger. It wouldn't be the first time. I went back to the bunk, laid my head against the pillow, and tried to settle in again. That's when the tapping came back. This time on the driver's side. Same rhythm, same deliberate cadence. Tap, tap, tap. I shot upright, heart pounding, and lunged for the window crank. My eyes swept the side mirror, then the ground outside. Still nothing. Just empty pavement and the faint ripples on the pond. A prickle crept across my skin. I reached across the cab and double-locked both doors, just to be safe. I cracked open the side hatches, letting in the cool night air, so I could at least hear better. If someone was screwing with me, I'd be ready to catch the sound of footsteps or breathing. 15 minutes crawled by, slow and silent. I sat in the dark, every nerve on edge, staring out into the nothing. That's when I heard it, a faint splat, splat, splat sliding along the driver's side of the truck. It wasn't footsteps exactly. It was lighter, wetter, like something soft hitting metal. My body tensed, and I moved carefully, trying not to make a sound as I stood up from the bunk. I leaned toward the driver's side window, ready to snap my head out the moment the tapping came again. But it didn't. Instead, there was a heavy thud above me, on the roof of the cab. The sound was so sudden, so sharp, it froze me in place. My breath hitched, and for a long moment, I didn't move at all. The roof creaked under the weight of something shifting up there. My first thought was that it had to be a person, maybe someone trying to break in, or worse, someone desperate enough to climb up and see what they could grab. I reached instinctively for my tire thumper hanging from the hook. The familiar weight of it in my hand steadied me a little. My knuckles whitened around the handle as I waited for the next sound. Then it came not from the door this time, but from directly above my head. Shuffling, scratching, and then a sudden slide. Before I could react, a goose, a full-grown, heavy, long-necked goose, slipped off the edge of the roof and crashed down onto my hood with a hollow bang. I flinched back, thumper raised, before I registered what I was actually looking at. The bird shook itself, flapped its wings once, then stood tall and stared straight through the windshield at me. Its beady eyes reflected the orange yard light, its head bobbing side to side like it was sizing me up. I let out a shaky laugh, though my heart was still hammering. The damn thing just stood there, shifting its weight, waddling back and forth across my hood like it owned the place. That's when the tapping started again. On my door. I snapped my head around, jaw clenched, and yanked the driver's side handle. The door swung open into the night air, and there it was, another goose, wings tucked tight against its sides, waddling away as fast as it could manage. It let out a loud, honking screech, like a kid laying on a car horn just to hear the noise. I finally understood. The pond. I leaned out the cab door and scanned the water's edge. Sure enough, there were dozens of them. Big, heavy geese scattered across the bank, milling around, flapping their wings, dipping their heads under the surface. Some were standing, others floating, all of them loud. They'd probably been roaming the lot for hours, curious and bold in the way geese always are when no one's around to chase them off. The one on my head gave another shake, flapped hard, and lifted into the air, circling back toward the water with an indignant honk. I watched it glide down and splash into the pond with the rest. I sat back in the driver's seat, dropped the thumper into the passenger floorboard, and rubbed my face with both hands. The adrenaline left me shaky, but the absurdity of it sank in too. Still, sleep wasn't easy after that. Every few minutes, another goose would come up to peck at the doors, tapping with its beak like it wanted inside. Sometimes they landed on the roof, their webbed feet pattering against the metal as they waddled back and forth. Other times, they just honked loud enough to rattle the glass. I must have dozed off and woken up a dozen times, each interruption making me more frustrated than scared. By dawn, when the first shift of workers started showing up, I looked out at the pond again. The geese were still there, scattered across the water, preening, honking, and generally making a mess of things. I didn't bother trying to sleep anymore. I got up, made some coffee, and sat there watching them as the sun came up, the ridiculousness of the night settling in. The whole thing had started like a horror movie, tapping at the windows, shadows outside, strange noises on the roof. But in the end, it was just geese. Persistent, obnoxious geese who had nothing better to do than terrorize a parked truck all night. When it came time for my pickup, I rolled out of that lot with the windows closed tight, still tired but more relieved than anything else. The pond shrank in the mirrors behind me, the gaggle of birds still strutting around like they owned the place. The night hadn't been supernatural. It hadn't been life-threatening, but sitting there in the cab, half asleep, hearing those deliberate knocks with no one in sight, it was enough to remind me how quickly the imagination can run wild. Sometimes the scariest things aren't even people or accidents or dark intentions. Sometimes it's just a bird with a sharp beak and too much curiosity. And I'll tell you this, after that night, I never parked next to a pond again if I could help it. I was running flatbed around 2006, hauling mostly building materials, and whatever else paid the bills. That was my life back then. Long days on the road, truck stops that started to all look the same, food that wasn't good for me but was easy, and nights spent sleeping in the cab, rocking gently when other rigs rumbled past. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept money in my pocket. I remember this particular run as clear as yesterday, though parts of it have blurred a bit around the edges with time. The place, the weather, the road, those little details stick, even when other things fade. I was somewhere in rural Tennessee, that much I know. Memory tells me it was somewhere between Memphis and Nashville, but not right off the interstate. This was back in the sticks, closer to that weird three-corner intersection where Tennessee kisses Mississippi and Alabama. I'd picked up a load of construction material, boxes of drywall, maybe roofing. I don't honestly remember the exact product after all these years. What I do remember was that it was palletized, boxed, stacked neat, and heavy enough that I had to use strap protectors to keep the edges of the boxes from tearing under the binders. The shipper required a tarp, so after I strapped everything down, I spread the tarps and bungees across it all, checked my corners, and headed out. It was late afternoon by then. Sun was getting lower, filtering through the tree line in that lazy golden way it does in the south. I'd been hoping for an easy stretch before dark. My next stop wasn't too far off, and if I made good time, I could shut down early for once. But maybe 20 minutes into the drive, I caught the sound of something flapping. The side mirror showed the tarp was working loose. Not terrible, but bad enough that if I left it, it'd only get worse and I'd end up with a ripped tarp or shredded bungees. On a two-lane road cutting through woods, I found a shoulder wide enough to pull the truck and trailer over without feeling like I'd get clipped by the next log hauler that came barreling down the hill. It was one of those stretches of road where you look both ways and realize you can't even see a house, let alone a business. Just miles of thick woods, leaf shadows stretching across the asphalt, not much else. I eased onto the gravel, set my brakes, and climbed down. When I walked back and looked at the load, I knew right away I'd done a lousy job with the tarps back at the shipper. It wasn't just one flap. I'd been in a hurry, probably thinking about supper or the next run, and rushed the job. Corners weren't snug, folds were sloppy. I decided to redo the whole thing. So I pulled off all the bungees, coiled them up, dragged the tarps down, rolled them back up, then climbed up on top of the load again. The sun was almost at treetop level now, painting everything orange and throwing long shadows. That's when I noticed a guy walking down the same side of the road I was on, coming toward my truck. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People walk these back roads all the time, out of gas, going to see a neighbor, or just wandering. I wasn't nervous at first, just aware. In the middle of nowhere, you keep an eye on anyone who comes close. I went back to my work, unrolling the tarp carefully this time, making sure it laid flat. By the time I got the heavy fabric spread and climbed down to start strapping again, the guy had covered a lot of ground. He was close enough now that I was paying more attention to him than to what I was doing. I grabbed my winch bar and set it on the trailer within easy reach. For someone who's never driven flatbed, a winch bar is about a 4-foot-long steel rod, solid and heavy, tapered blunt on one end, hollow on the other. You use it to crank straps tight, but it doubles as a pretty serious piece of metal if things ever went sideways. The guy finally got to me, and the first thing I noticed up close was his hair. It looked like he'd tried to give himself a mullet with dull scissors, and then stopped halfway. Patchy as hell, uneven like he'd hacked at it while drunk or having some kind of fit, then shrugged and called it good. The second thing I noticed were his eyes. They weren't glassy or bloodshot like a drunk's, not jittery like someone high. They were just wrong. Clear but not right. The kind of look that makes your stomach tighten, like there's no telling what's going on inside his head. His clothes were dirty, stained jeans, a t-shirt that had seen better days, and old white tennis shoes. One shoe had no laces, and the tongue stuck out at an angle. It caught my eye because it looked so sloppy, like he'd just shoved his foot in and didn't care. He stopped near me and waited until I looked at him. Then he said, calm as anything, "I've got a long walk." That was it. No hello, no asking for a ride straight out. Just that. I nodded and said something like, "Yeah, man, looks like you do. We're out in the middle of nowhere." My tone made it clear there wasn't a ride coming from me. I wasn't about to put a stranger in my cab. Company rules and insurance aside, it just wasn't smart. He gave a small nod, almost like he expected that answer, and started walking again. Past me, walked on up to about where the driver's door of my truck was, then stopped, turned, and came back to me. Same exact words. "I've got a long walk." Now I was less comfortable. Once could be brushed off. Twice, with him doubling back like that, made me uneasy. I explained again, more directly, that I couldn't give him a ride. Said sorry, wished him luck. He seemed to accept it, nodded again, and turned away. I watched him head down the road a little while, far enough I figured I could finish up my tarps without him circling back again. I worked faster now, pulling bungees, hooking them tight, checking the corners. Every few seconds, I glanced up to see where he was. He kept moving away. But when I was clipping on the last strap, I looked again, and he wasn't walking away anymore. He'd turned around. Now he was about 100 yards in front of my truck, heading straight back toward me. What froze me for a second was the way he was moving. One hand was up against his face, fingers curled like he was holding a phone, mouth moving. His other hand waved now and then, like he was having a full-on conversation. I finished the last bungee, grabbed the winch bar, and climbed into my cab. Doors locked instantly. I set the winch bar across the passenger seat. As he got closer, 10 yards, maybe less, I realized he wasn't talking into a phone. He was talking into his hand. His face was twisted, not calm anymore, not casual. He looked angry, like he was in the middle of some heated argument with someone who wasn't there. That was enough for me. I cranked the engine, dropped it in gear, and rolled out without even checking the road. Gravel kicked under the tires as I pulled forward. When I passed him, I glanced his way. He lowered his hand just enough to look straight at me, face blank now, dead stare, no emotion. Just eyes locked on me as I rolled past, my whole rig rumbling by within feet of him. By the time I hit 5th, maybe 6th gear, I checked my mirror. Nothing. No man on the shoulder, no movement in the fading light. Just empty road stretching back through the trees. I kept driving. Didn't slow down, didn't stop until I reached a truck stop off the main highway about an hour later. Parked, killed the engine, and sat there for a while, letting my nerves settle. Ate something, tried to laugh it off. Told myself it was just some backwoods guy with issues, probably harmless, just odd. But the way he stared at me, the way he argued with his own hand, that stuck with me. I've seen a lot of strange things in my years driving, but that one I never forgot. Out there on a Tulane, Tennessee back road, in the middle of nowhere, it was just me, my truck, and a man who wasn't right in the head. And the feeling that if I'd hesitated, if I'd let him get close enough, things might have gone very differently. I drove away, and I didn't look back again. I used to work as a road train driver in the Gascoyne region of outback Western Australia, and if you've never been out there at night, it's hard to really explain what it feels like. Endless red dirt roads, open plains that seem to go on forever, scrub and bush scattered across the horizon, and then there's the silence. The kind of silence that presses on your ears until the only sound left is the hum of your own truck or the wind rattling the mirrors. Nights out there stretch long, and when you're already tired, your mind starts filling in the gaps. Every driver out there knows about the black dog. It's a name we throw around for the things you see when you've been awake too long. Shapes in the shadows that shift when you blink. Animals that aren't animals. Figures that melt into the dark as soon as your headlights catch them. Fatigue plays tricks on you. I'd be cruising along and swear I saw someone walking along the side of the road, but when I got closer it would just be a bush or the bent stump of a tree. Sometimes a group of goats would wander across, and out of the corner of my eye, they'd look like something bigger, something wrong. You shake your head, blink hard, and remind yourself you've just been driving too long. One night, though, I had something happen that I can still remember clear as day. It wasn't like the other tricks my eyes had played. This was something that rattled me so bad I changed the way I worked. It started like any other shift. I'd been running a load down toward the port. The sky had that washed-out look just before the sun dips, that golden light that stretches everything long and makes the dust glow. Once the sun set, it was just me, the road train, and the darkness. I was used to it, hundreds of kilometers between towns, no one else on the road for hours at a time, only the occasional kangaroo darting across or a group of goats clustered near the edge of the bitumen. I remember thinking I was more tired than usual, that heavy feeling behind the eyes. My jaw kept loosening until I'd catch myself almost nodding off. I pulled over at one point, right out in the middle of nowhere. No buildings, no lights, just the wide empty bush stretching out on all sides. The red dirt, the scraggly shrubs, the stars beginning to come out sharp and endless above me. That's the thing about the outback, you feel small under that sky. I let the truck idle down. The engine is massive, and you don't just shut it off straight away. You let it run cold for 10 minutes, let it ease itself down after working hard for hours. The vibration settled into a low growl, then finally faded into silence when I cut the ignition. The sudden quiet always felt strange. No hum, no vibration, just stillness. I stretched out across the bunk in the cab, trying to close my eyes. I wasn't fully asleep, more drifting in and out. The air was warm, but inside the cab it felt cooler than outside, so I left the window cracked a little. Every time I felt myself drifting off, some sound or flicker of thought would drag me back awake. The creak of the truck cooling, the faint rustle of wind moving through the scrub, a fly buzzing against the glass. At some point I must have actually dozed off, because I woke with a start. The first thing that hit me was the noise. Not voices, nothing clear like that, but a jumble of sounds that felt like they were patterned somehow, like there was an order to them, even if I couldn't pick out what it was. A mix of scraping, shuffling, maybe even a low grumble. It wasn't the kind of random noise you ignore. It had a rhythm, a pulse to it, like whatever was making it was doing it together. Then the cab shook. At first I thought I'd dreamed it, but then it happened again, an unmistakable jolt that ran through the frame, making the side mirror tremble. I sat up, heart hammering. I'd been parked on flat dirt, not even close to a slope. It wasn't the wind rocking it, not like that. This was deliberate, heavy. Something was moving outside, pressing against the truck. I fumbled for the mirror and peered out. That's when I saw them. Shadows moving around the edges of the truck. My lights were off, so all I had was the faint silver glow of the moon and stars, but I could see shapes, dark, low, shifting. At first I thought goats. Out there, that was always a safe bet. But there were too many, circling too close, their movements sharp and strange. Every time I tried to focus on one, it seemed to slip back into the dark, another appearing on the opposite side. The cab jolted again, harder this time. I felt it through the mattress, the whole frame shuddering. It would take a lot to move a rig that size, even slightly. That's what made my skin crawl. Whatever was out there wasn't just brushing past, it was testing, pressing, shoving. I didn't waste any more time. My hands were shaking as I jammed the key back in and twisted. The engine roared to life, deep and loud, filling the night with a wall of sound. I flicked on every single light I had, high beams, spotlights, floodlights. The truck lit up like a stadium, beams cutting through the scrub in every direction. For a split second I thought I saw shapes scatter, slipping back into the darkness beyond the reach of the light. Maybe goats, maybe something else. I'll never know for sure. But they were gone as soon as the lights hit. I slammed it into gear and rolled forward, gravel crunching under the tires, my heart thumping so loud it drowned out everything else. I didn't look back in the mirrors again. I didn't want to. I just kept driving, pushing the truck faster than I normally would on those stretches, eyes glued to the road ahead. The rest of the night was a blur of headlights and endless bitumen. Every shadow on the roadside looked alive. Every flicker of movement made me grip the wheel tighter. By the time I finally saw the glow of the port lights on the horizon, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for hours. I told myself it was the wind, that maybe a group of goats had wandered too close, bumped the truck, and my fatigue had blown it out of proportion. Out there, you get so tired your brain makes anything seem possible. That's the rational answer, the one I still lean on. But I know how it felt in that cab. That wasn't just wind, and goats don't shake a road train cab hard enough to wake a sleeping driver. After that night, I never slept during a night shift again. If I was tired, I'd push through until daylight before pulling over. I didn't care how heavy my eyes got or how much the black dog crept into the corners of my vision. Anything was better than lying there in the dark, half asleep, waiting for that sound to start again or for the cab to shudder beneath me. I've been around long enough to know the outback doesn't need ghosts or monsters to scare you. It's big, it's empty, and it doesn't care if you're tired or alone or scared out of your wits. Sometimes that's enough to put the fear in you. And for me, that night was enough. I still don't know what was out there, but I know what it did to me. And I never gave the outback another chance to catch me sleeping.